Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Come with me as we step into the deep, dark forest of fear, and let us pray we see sunrise in the morning. Got another installment from the fantastic original series by the incredible Michael G. Lockhart. As ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR? And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled Bloody Bones and Green Eyes. Let's get straight into that. Chad was pretty tired after the hunt, but he just couldn't wait to get started on his examination of the enormous black feline. On appearance alone, it was unique, magnificent, even in death. He had no doubt that this was, as yet, an unproven genus. Following many years of cryptozoological speculation, the proof lay stretched out in front of him on the cold and sterile lab table. As he raised his scalpel to make the first incision, he heard a noise from the corridor and a door opened. Two men entered the lab room and he looked quizzically at them. It was late and no one else should have been in the building. Even the cleaning staff had left. The elder of the pair spoke first. "Good evening, sir. My name is Silvio and this is Jay. We are from DMT Solutions Incorporated and are currently contracted with the Bureau of Land Management and State Parks and Wildlife Department." With this, Silvio produced a sheath of documents and official-looking identification cards. His partner stood silently to one side and crossed his hands at his waistline. Odd, Chad thought. What's with the weird glove on Jay's left hand? Even more odd, what do they want? "Well, I'm not sure how you got into this facility, but you can leave by the same processing. Come back tomorrow during business hours." As he spoke, he eased over towards the phone he'd set on the counter by the clean-up area, and Jay intercepted him with a smooth sidestep. "No need for that, sir. We're not here to harm you in any way." And Chad bristled. So why did BLM or Parks send contractors instead of their own agents? And Silvio raised his hands in a reassuring gesture. "Our company specializes in the more exotic cases that involve the natural and technical world. In short, we will be taking the specimen and any notes or recordings of it. This is a non-negotiable, and there will be no appeal. After tonight, there will be no mention of anything but an escaped tiger from a private collection." TJ rose and padded over to the front door. Cassie and Natalie whisked over in their stocking-clad feet to join him in his espionage. They strained to hear, and Uncle Jim's voice came raspy, but loud enough to hear. "Just like the one Brother Carl and I took out so long ago. Somewhere between that woman's scream of a cougar and a roar of a tiger." He shuddered, though the teens couldn't see him. Another voice spoke very smoothly. "Hard to believe that a new one moved in so quickly after this latest elder cat. However, the logging industry has been driving him closer and closer to human settlements. It may already have been searching for territory. We don't know that much about their behavior. As you know, better than most, they are rare and elusive." A more youthful voice then chimed in. "Mr. Bruxton, do you think you'll be able to convince your family members on the escaped, euthanized tiger story?" Uncle Jim grunted. They'll do what's needed, and so will their friends. They're good young'uns, and their folks raised them well. Sounds like you've taken care of the expert, the carcass, and the game warden. You'll handle Sheriff Green and Sergeant tomorrow morning?" "First thing," the smooth voice said. "Well then, since the kids are at least the ones that are not in the hospital, are likely listening to us, I'll go explain in full, okay? As much as necessary to the brats, Uncle Jim rasped. If you need anything, you have my number. Looks like my little girl was still picking recruits effectively. A smooth voice replied with some humour in his tone. Yes, sir. Ed still keeps her foot in the appropriate backsides. I think I'll see where she gets it from. At that point, the youngsters fled back to their previous perches, while the late-night visitors bid farewell to Uncle Jim. He presently entered the front room and cleared his throat. We'll talk in the morning. I'm tired and I don't feel like listening to a lot of you asking silly questions all night. Get some rest and keep the whispering to a minimum. I always hated the sound of whispers, sibilant and sneaky, like so many snakes hissing in one's ears. He groused as he shuffled off to the downstairs guest room. Uncle Jim met them at breakfast, along with Terry Ann. You need to hear this too, little mother. The two who met me last night, they work for an outfit from which I retired after my hitch in wonderful Southeast Asia and exiting the 60s. It's how I was able to buy a nice place in an antique truck that runs better than any recent model vehicle on the road. He grinned his yellow grin. Anywho, the company specializes in taking care of unusual situations. Governments, not just ours, are a primary contractor, but other private enterprises often engage in the services of DMT Solutions, Inc. Now, the two field agents they sent came at my request through your second cousin, my daughter Edwina, who's in management at the company. Y'all haven't met her, but Travis Sr. grew up with her, or at least some. Back then, cousins visited one another for week-long stints to give parents a break, especially in the summertime. The big cat, Green Eyes, is what's called a cryptid. Well, that's a creature that's not officially recorded or catalogued, and for which there is only anecdotal or circumstantial evidence, or at least as far as the public is concerned. As we've discussed, big black cats are known to range around these parts on occasion. They usually don't bother people and only rarely dine on livestock. He looked at TJ. Yours lived longer than most and had some interesting wounds that had healed, but definitely left him stove up and in no shape to hunt wild game. They are their own species, but related to jaguars and tigers more than anything. Or maybe. They are not hyper-animalistic, but are truly black cats. That's all you need to know, because what you're gonna say, if pressed by officials, is that it was a tiger. Those things actually do escape from private collections. Or in fact, DMT gets calls about those too, so that they stay out of the news. Can't have people panicking or running around on a spur-of-the-moment tiger hunts. And he paused for the inevitable questions. Jim drove the young people to school. You three need to think about school. You've had enough break time, Travis, and you've had all too many distractions. I don't have anything else to do. I'll worry about the new kitty cat and my friends will be helping. Best you all ignore us. Maybe you can meet them when it's all done. Shouldn't take more than a day or 3. Uncle Jim, are you going to shoot it? Cassie asked in a concerned tone. Jim maintained his focus on the road. Probably not. If we can, we'll trank him. He's not a human eater, but he won't like us lurking in his new territory. Still, might be dangerous. Well, naturally, they all worried all day and couldn't concentrate or anything else. TJ nearly leapt from his skin when he heard a text notification during lunch. It was Will. Can you bring me my school assignments? I'd asked Mum, but she has enough on her plate with the little ones. Of course. Uncle Jim can bring me over. He's with us for a visit. He decided not to mention the new cat. Will would want to strap on a stick leg and hobble out to help him hunt it. He'd have to share his thoughts on that with Cassie and Natalie. Especially Cassie. Though time with Natalie was more interesting. After school, he asked Uncle Jim about going over to the hospital. He knew it was a long drive for the old man and tried to avoid making him feel obligated. Yet, Uncle Jim seemed eager for the task. "Sure, come on, boy. Let's get going. I need to have a word with that friend of yours before he gets a clear head and starts running that mouth of his. You can text your mum and sister after we're on the road. Somebody has to stay and watch the homestead, and Cassie's probably thumbing away on that phone of hers. She'll be fine. Your mother will be home any minute." TJ thought that the man was scary at times, with his ability to anticipate objections and arguments. He certainly had enough life experience, though. They got to the hospital just as Will's mother was leaving the room. "Miss Cheryl, nice to see you." Uncle Jim hugged the younger woman. "That tough young man of yours getting loose any time soon?" And she smiled tiredly. "Yes, but he'll be in a wheelchair for a while. They've finished the first surgery and want to get him into a physical therapy, and then roll him out of the door. Just as well, this is the most expensive motel in the country. And even with all the pain and the drugs, he's restless." TJ looked on in heartfelt remorse. "Miss Cheryl, I can't tell you how sorry I am. I just didn't think straight. I should have never taken Will with me. I do what I can to help y'all." Cheryl patted him on the cheek. "TJ, you are a hard-headed, ignorant boy, but Will played his part too. And we called him Will instead of William or Billy, not only to make it different from his dad, but because he has such a strong will. Might even say a hard head. You two are so much like your dads that..." She trailed off and had a weary smile return. "Y'all stay safe. I gotta get home to the little ones before they go to bed. Their Aunt Gina is with them." They said their goodnights, and the two Broxton men sidled up to Will's bed where he snored lightly. "Hey, Will, it's TJ," his friend whispered softly, to which there was no response. Uncle Jim rolled his eyes, took Will by the shoulder, and shook him. "Wake up, boy. We need to talk." He said it in a normal conversational tone, yet it seemed loud in the hospital room. Will's eyes flooded open, and they quickly had him up to speed, and TJ could tell that he was fidgeting and anxious to get out and get on the hunt. "So, you got that old summer bitch after all?" "No surprise, TJ. You always were the best shot." TJ looked abashed. "Nah, Will, we got him. Your hit killed him as much as mine. He'd have taken longer to die with either wound, but with both, he didn't last long." His face lit with a sly grin. "I could have left you out of there and gone back to get help. You'd have been fine." Will shuddered. "Yeah, well, we didn't know, and I'd have died of a heart attack." After the boys had their moment of levity, Jim got down to business, and shortly Will had the story straight with the admonition that he didn't need to offer the tale, and would be better off pretending to not recall or to be traumatized, and just tell it when pressed by officials. They promised to let him know as soon as possible what happened with the new feline terror. Uncle Jim didn't say much on the drive back home. He was pensive, and TJ stayed busy with his own internal dialogue. The new two legs had trespassed through his new territory today. He had found a nice pile of rocks and fallen trees that overlooked a freshwater creek. He was unable to watch the creatures stalk along the flowing stream. Like game, they would have been easy prey. But he had no desire to eat such foul-smelling beings. Not when there were so many tasty animals that roamed the area. He did not like these two. They carried the weapons that made stinking thunder and left other creatures dead from a distance. They walked with confidence and were all too alert. Yet, they missed him on his new favorite perch. He let forth a low, rumbling, irritated growl. "I can't believe the size of those tracks," Jay said excitedly. "Are we sure this thing is a regular big cat or not some mutant like those Hogs? His eyes grew distant for just a moment with the remembered trauma of having his arm torn from his body and of others perishing horribly. Those poor ladies. DMT Solutions Inc. had helped him recover and had replaced his state-of-the-art prosthetic, the one tracked by local media, with a biotech miracle arm that felt so natural, yet was incredibly advanced. Silvio nodded. Yes, these things are big on their own. Some may even have bred with feral jaguars or tigers, but the dark fur covering is a dominant trait. I saw a crossbreed once, singular animal, dusky black with jet-colored stripes and those sideburns that tigers grow. Smart and extremely dangerous. If we don't have any more luck tomorrow, we may have to do an after-dark hunt. Jim Broxton met them on the front porch. It was late once again, and he had just returned from driving his great-nephew to the hospital to visit his friend. The Jenkins kid is on board. He's a good sort. Too bad about his leg. He rasped and glanced meaningfully at Jay's left arm. Silvio shrugged. Excellent. We found tracks today, but sporadic. No scat and no signs of recent kills. This one is more than likely the traditional crypto cat. The way you describe the original green eyes, very elusive. I've seen a couple in captivity, and as I told Jay earlier, I saw another one that was a crossbreed with a feral tiger. At least that's what the folks at the facility told me. Who knows with our biolab personnel? Jim frowned. Sneaky bastard is what I call it. Look, my great-nephew is a solid tracker and knows this area as well as anyone could. Day after tomorrow is Saturday. If you haven't had any luck, maybe he can help. I'll be there to ensure he behaves himself. I know we don't exactly do ride-alongs, but, well, I'd like an unbiased opinion if you'll take a look and shoot me straight on what you observe. He may be worth recruiting, and if so, I'd like to start steering his education and experiences in the right direction. He again looked pointedly at Jay's arm. Well, Will Jenkins could be another, but he needs some assistance with his leg. I've already spoken with Ed about how we might be able to help in any case. Main thing is, I've watched these two grow up, along with my great-niece Cassie. They know how to keep their mouths shut. Family trait. His frown evolved into a wicked grin. And they can handle themselves and shoot better than most of our recruits do, day one. Both of the current DMT Solutions employees remain silent. They're exemplary specimens of the results of the company policy and training. Eventually, Silvio answered politely. Yes, sir. If we haven't had any luck, then perhaps young TJ may accompany us. I already have a trainee to evaluate, but one more shouldn't be too much trouble, especially with his mentor along to babysit. He smiled just as wickedly as had Jim. Wahoo enjoyed the bright sunlight as he harvested some of the latest crops from his greenhouse. It was hidden in a patch of trees beside a little behind his trailer. Not out in a monster-infested wilderness, just a screen of verdant vegetation to keep out curious eyes. Still, since recent events, he was more terrified than ever of entering the woods or even walking past trees. And then those two goons had stopped by to warn him of telling any tales. Like he wanted scrutiny. He didn't care what they called themselves. They were either government, spooks, or organized crime. Either way, he'd obey. Not like he had anyone left to tell. His big concern was the part of the business that Sam C. had done so well. Customer contacts and purchasing the other products for their special blend. Sam C. was gone, and so he'd have to do it on his own. On the other hand, Lil Luther was gone, and that was a bonus. The dude was scary. He finished up and started walking back to his trailer, his handiwork left behind in a workshop adjacent to the greenhouse. And then he heard the boom, 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 boom of a car stereo, played at an unreasonable level inside a car with rolled-up windows, only the bass noise extruded as it rattled the entire frame. He had no idea whom it could be. Maybe Sam C had scheduled someone before. He was eaten. Wahoo gulped and shivered. The noise grew temporarily louder as the car door opened and then abruptly ceased. The silence was short-lived as at least 2 car doors slammed shut. He hesitantly peered from behind the last bowls before he reached the tiny cleared area around his trailer that passed for a yard. Cleared was a generous description. It was where weeds took over from trees. The little mud and grass driveway was now occupied by a flashy SUV. The recent occupants of that very fine ride now stood arrayed and threateningly outside his hovel. One of them knocked loudly on the door. Not good, he cringed to himself. These were definitely associates of Lil Luther. Luther was from the nearest small city, the local college town that gave local drug dealers so much prosperity. Yet, these guys were obviously big time, big city dudes, the kind who oozed underworld power. Open up, shithead! You can't run, you can't hide, and you sure can't fight. And with that bellow, an unreasonably large man in Wahoo's opinion pounded on and dented the little door. And from the way the structure shook, Wahoo feared that that door would cave in and fall off, or both. Maybe the entire trailer would tip. In his concern for his pitiful home, all that he had, he let caution fly and stepped out from behind the tree. Excuse me? He said and raised his hand like an elementary school student. He quickly lowered it. It made no difference. While the men hadn't heard him, they were clearly alert and one well-dressed quartet spotted him. You Wahoo? He asked. Yeah, sir. Wahoo responded in his typical snivelling manner. The best dressed of the group, at least to Wahoo's eyes. After all, he wore the most jewellery, gave him a humorous smile. We just came from Luther's funeral. Only reason to be down this way, except for some business with you. Wahoo had just enough time to note the change in language from professional to urban vernacular before the Colossus seized him by the neck and dragged him before the Bling Master. Friday, after school, TJ and Cassie caught a ride from Uncle Jim. Your buddy Will is getting out of hospital shortly. Thought you might like to be there to greet him. They of course readily agreed. They all went to the Jenkins home to celebrate. Hot Wheels and his first steps towards true recovery. His young siblings were over the moon and chatted excitedly as they vied for turns to push the wheelchair. They loved their Aunt Jenna, but had really missed their big brother, who usually looked after them when their mother was working or busy. After the initial enthusiasm had settled, Will sat with TJ, Cassie, and Natalie. So, are we going to go on that hunt for the new cat? Will asked while sporting his lopsided grin. Bet I can still ride the four-wheeler. TJ shook his head. These friends of Uncle Jim aren't like the local laws. They're competent. Almost scary, but kind of cool too. I don't think we'll get a chance to tangle with this one. Cassie then chimed in. Besides, it's my turn to hunt a big cat, even if, well, especially if we're going to knock it out or move it. Hunting is one thing, but this is a rare creature. And she trailed off, clearly fascinated by the near-mythical cryptid. Natalie batted her cartoon Disney princess eyes. I don't want you to, any of you, charging into those woods after a monster like that. Look what it did to you, Will. And while Travis tries to hide it, he's still healing from his own wounds. Let the professionals deal with it. Travis gazed at her, hormones raging, and simply nodded. You're right, Natalie. He didn't notice Cassie's eye roll or Will's widening grin. He detected the stench of several two-legs in his territory. They carried some type of death dealers, but not exactly the same as those that the two hunters had. Those two searched elsewhere today, deeper in the forest. He'd had enough. He would investigate this new, particularly smelly group, to cover their natural stench with strong, piquant odours. "Get moving, fool!" The man with the bling, dressed too well for his environment, smacked Wahoo on the back of his head to send him reeling forward in an attempt to remain on his feet. "Show us where you last see Lufa." Wahoo, shaken in terror both from being in the woods once more and from his company, picked up his pace and looked around in confusion. They were on the trail, but he had no idea exactly where the cat with the enormous green eyes, had waylaid little Lufa. He knew that it didn't really matter. These city dudes would accept pretty much any answer. He glanced back over his shoulder and he saw Blingmaster, Behemoth, and one other, but he didn't see the fourth. He glanced a few more times until he saw that far behind them, the last thug stood near a large old pine taking a leak. I think it was like here, in this clearing. Sir. Bling smiled at him. He even had sparkling items in his teeth. "Good then. Get on your knees right where little Lufa died. Show us how much you respect him." The three men surrounded him. The fourth had not yet caught up. "Like, weird," his mind stammered. And then he heard the thunderous, shrieking roar of the cat. The old man had called it Green Eyes. It was so close. It was followed immediately by the choked cries of the pissing guy. Wahoo knew just what had happened, and he turned and began to piss right there, right inside his britches. And then he stood and fled. His erstwhile executioners paid him no attention. They drew their pistols and began to fire into the trees towards the shadow that had disappeared and left their companion in the crumpled, bloody, and clearly dead heap. "What the actual fuck was that?" Marcus King shouted. The enormous man on his right, BMF, shrugged. "Dunno, but it was fast." Bingo. The thug on his left just stood shaking, mouth hanging open and eyes bulged in astonishment and fear. Off in the distance, Silvio and Jay clearly heard the shots, likely pistol shots, small caliber. "Looks like we have company," Silvio stated unnecessarily. "Best head that way." There was another sound before those shots. As they neared the area where the shots originated, they heard the sound of heavy panting and wheezing from the other side of a large rotten stump. Presently there was a sniffle and a sob. They flanked the creature and found a scrawny, dishevelled human, sides heaving with unaccustomed physical effort, drenched in sweat, and alternately attempting to stretch out and stitch in his ribs and curl up into a ball. He reeked of sweat, dirty clothes, and urine. "Wahoo, we met earlier, yes?" Silvio inquired in his smooth, continental tones. The foul-smelling young man looked up at the two goons. "Great," he thought abjectly. "Those others wanted to execute me, and now these two will just murder me and leave me to rot. Green Eyes wants to eat me." Jay remained alert and focused on the forest around them while Silvio crouched and attempted to communicate with the terrified fellow before him. "It's all right, buddy. We don't want to harm you. And from the look of you, someone or something else did. And will you tell us about it? Maybe we can help." Wahoo continued to pant and twitch for a moment, and then hung his head and drew in a deep breath and let it out a heavy sigh. He nodded weakly. Yes, sir. It was like some guys from, like the city, the real city. Big-time dudes, like serious, bad dudes. They said they wanted to see where little Lufa died. They made me like..." He cringed and shook for a moment. "I think they were gonna shoot me in the back of the head, but then that... Green Eyes, that's what the old man called it. It's like... it screamed and... I think it took one of the guys out. I don't know. I was so scared and..." At that, he descended into racking sobs. "Stay quiet, Wahoo," Silvio admonished gently. "We don't want those dudes to find us, and we'll keep you safe and get you out the woods." Wahoo snuffled his way into a semblance of quiet as the professional stepped back a little. Jay took a turn watching their new charge, and Silvio took a turn scanning the trees and brush that surrounded them completely. They listened for a moment and caught several shouts, like men on the hunt and crying out to one another. One of them was fairly close. "Looks like the little shit went this way." After the party, Uncle Jim let TJ drive his truck as they made their way home. He had a hardship driver license and could use the practice with an expert coach. "So, Uncle Jim, you really think the DMT guys will let me help?" "That depends on how things go on today's hunt. They started early, well before dawn. If they don't get it today, they'll likely switch to an evening night hunt tomorrow." "Well, why can't I come along? I have better eyes for tracking than anybody," Cassie piped up from the back seat. "And besides, I can still shoot without cringing from hurt ribs, unlike Hero Boy." She nudged the back of the driver's seat in mock annoyance at her older brother. Uncle Jim gave her a stern look. "We might, if you behave yourself. Probably not, though. You might have a good eye, but you can't set down that fool device of yours long enough to concentrate on the real world. Work on it. You kids think you are great at divided attention skills? Well, that'll work right up until some apex predator starts munching on your bloody bones." And TJ wisely focused on his driving while his sister fumed in frustration and Uncle Jim mused the rest of the way home. It was getting on towards evening when they arrived. Terry Ann was already home and waiting on the porch. She'd only just arrived, and the rest of the group helped her shop groceries into the kitchen. The fresh groceries perked up Cassie from her sulk and returned her to a more amenable state. As the kids put away the items, Terry Ann began to prepare supper. Then, from the woods nearby, they heard shots ring out and a truncated scream shattered the peaceful tableau of the family's Friday night plans for relaxation. Silvio kept his eyes trained on the area from which the voice had sounded. He gestured for Jay to get Wahoo in hand and keep him quiet. Jay clamped his cobalt blue prosthetic hand over Wahoo's open mouth, and he took care. He discovered early on that the hand was more powerful than his natural one had been. "Don't make a sound," he said, Soto voice near Wahoo's ear. "Don't whisper, don't move, and we'll handle this, but we need you to be absolutely still while we do it. You understand?" Wahoo nodded. "Good." Jay gave him a soft, reassuring pat on the shoulder and then rose to join Silvio. Those two quickly faded into the wall of green. The thrashing of the brush from the direction from which Wahoo had run increased and presently caught flashes of colour from the man's garments as he grimly moved forward towards his prey. "Me!" Wahoo thought. He had tried to run again, but he was so tired, and he'd promised the nice young goon with his freaky hand that he'd behave. Bingo was angry. His shoes, his entire outfit was ruined from forcing his way through tangles of vegetation. They didn't know for sure what had happened to Rodney, but it had to have been messy. Then they had realized that the little rat shit dude had scampered into the brush to hide. Oh, they couldn't leave it. He had to be taken care of. He'd seen too much. He had a pistol in hand, a nice 9mm. They all had that caliber. Marcus had brought them for his whole crew. He knew Marcus wanted to take out the little turd, and Lil Luther had been his cousin. Wahoo hadn't been too clear about what happened. Some bullshit about an escaped tiger. About the time that thought entered his mind, he felt a change in the air, and the heel of blue palm struck him in the side of his jaw. He dropped to the pine straw-covered ground and lay still. He didn't feel the hands that swiftly removed its pistol from his relaxed grip. "So, what do we do with him?" Jay asked his field trainer as he fastened the heavy-duty zip tie around the gangster's wrists. The tie had been intended to close the mouth of the big cat after they paralyzed it with darts. They had others to bind its paws until they could get it into a cage. He took the decorative but flashy handkerchief from the man's suit pocket and stuffed it into his mouth to keep him quiet. Silvio stood quietly in contemplation for a moment as his trainee wrapped up his efforts and the criminal. He could probably tell us why the gang turds keep showing up out here in the woods. Maybe our buddy Wahoo would know. After that, well, we can't have word of what's out here get around. And then again, these rocket surgeons are hardly credible witnesses. Let's cross that bridge when we come to it, huh? Wahoo thinks Green Eye's got one, and we have this one. Let's see if Wahoo can tell us how many are left. He had enjoyed killing the two legs, though it had been over very quickly. The meat had tasted foul, but the blood was sweet enough. It had an odd aftertaste, though. He'd felt a slight rush of energy from it, but that too had faded, and his mood had turned sourly. He'd now have to hunt down the rest of them without having any meat to show for his efforts, at least none worth eating. His ears heard from the noise of those stinking things the creatures held in their hands. Not like those of the hunters, but possibly dangerous. Same stench. And then he discovered his next target. The one with the glinting objects around his neck and wrists. Marcus was enraged. He'd come here to take what revenge he could for the death of his cousin, and now that opportunity had been taken from him. He fumed as he stalked through the trees where he'd seen the shadow disappear. He'd sent Bingo after the skinny little weasel who left his cuz to die, while he and BMF hunted a new killer, the real killer. Stupid Rodney had stopped not only to take a piss but to take a hit. He just couldn't leave the pipe alone. Marcus had been ready to send him packing, but he hadn't intended to kill him. Now they were out in the woods, and it was getting dark. The people who owned the land would be back soon. Dang! What was that ahead? Green eyeshine? Almost a glow of twin emerald fires emanating from within the shadows? He was mesmerized for a moment, brought to a halt by the hypnotic gaze. And then they blinked, and the spell was broken. He managed to fire his pistol a few times, but never raised it properly. It was just a reflex caused by the rush of adrenaline through his system. A sensation he barely had time to detect as the green eyes became an enormous orbs, and he screamed in panic as the jaws gaped and razor claws dug into his shoulders and upper arms. He hit the ground, and the wind rushed from his lungs as he felt the fangs slide into the flesh on either side of his throat. It stung, it hurt, and his breathing was cut short, and then, with a quick snap, the enormous fur-covered head rotated and broke his neck. For a few more horrid seconds, Marcus could still feel the hot, fetid breath at his throat, and then he heard a tremendous animal sprang back into the trees, and with his rapidly fading senses, he heard BMF call out to him like a lost bull. "Marcus, where you at?" Blood filled his throat, and the squeaking gasp he uttered was his last sound. TJ snapped up his hunting knife and his .308 rifle and ran towards the back door of the house. Cassie followed him with a .223 and a spotlight. Uncle Jim awaited them at the foot of the porch, his normally concealed long-barreled pistol now gleaming in the holster under his left arm. He also clutched a flashlight. "You kids ready?" He grinned his yellow teeth and held out his left hand in gesture of invitation. Terry Ann stopped on the porch, shotgun in hand. "Cassie, maybe you better..." Cassie pretended not to hear her mother and disappeared into the tree line behind her big brother. Uncle Jim turned to the worried mother. "Don't worry, I'll keep an eye on them, if I can keep up." And then he turned and faded into the shadows under the trees and left the worried mother alone to stand guard on the house. Wahoo once again stumbled through the brush and made an inordinate amount of noise. The goons had saved him. But why? Probably to do something worse to him. That's what a lifetime of experience told him. He thought he'd circled back towards one trail which he was familiar with. He was pretty sure. And then he paused and leaned forward to dry heave. His stomach was full of air from his heaving breaths. He had never been in shape to get back out of it, and he'd really had to work up a sweat. All he knew was that he had to get out of the woods before those green eyes found him. Silvio shrugged. One less to worry about. We may have to go find him tomorrow, but for now, we have a combination of gangsters and a big cat that is apparently pissed. He nudged Rodney with his foot. This one will make great bait for Eva Terror. He grinned savagely near Rodney's face. It was getting dark and he wanted to ensure the greatest effect. You just got a lucky break. We won't untie you, but you can make as much noise as you like. And with that, he pulled off the makeshift gag. Rodney obligingly started to burst out loud expletives, followed by empty threats of what would happen if they untied him. Meanwhile, Silvio nodded his head to Jay, and they faded into the darkness of the forest of fear, to await whichever predator or predators would arrive first. BMF had not been too far from Marcus and soon found his carcass, despite a decided lack of woodsman-like skills and a rapidly fading light. Everything around him had faded to dark, dense green spectral light. The exceptionally large man was as frightened as he'd ever been. The gleam of golden adornments from his now former boss glittered on the forest floor around her only slightly mangled body. That didn't bother BMF. He'd seen plenty of blood and had spilled much of it. Yet this was Marcus, his friend, his boss, his gang brother. He retrieved Marcus's pistol and stuffed it into his jacket pocket. It never occurred to him to simply take the extra rounds and transfer them to his own pistol magazine. He glanced around cautiously and considered what had attacked Marcus. It had to be large and dangerous. BMF was huge, but Marcus was by no means a small man, and when not beside his elephantine bodyguard, he had usually been the largest man in the room. And then, in the encroaching dark, he heard rustles in the trees. He was never good at hiding, but he drew close to a large old pine and put his back to it. He was very good at standing incredibly still or fading into the background, yet remaining alert and watchful. He made an excellent bodyguard. TJ and Cassie had immediately slowed once they were out of sight of their home and, more importantly, their mother. He felt a pang of guilt, but shook it off. He had no time for that. He could make it up to her later. Somehow. He also wanted Uncle Jim to be able to keep up, and he was sure that a man could handle himself. Even at near 80, it would be rude and perhaps dangerous to rush Elder Broxton. The trio stalked towards the area where they'd heard the truncated scream. Not even animals were totally silent when they moved on dry pine straw and had to make their way through branches and briars and tangled vines. But these three were as quiet as a large animal on the stalk could manage. TJ felt Cassie's hand on his shoulder. She gave a squeeze and applied downward pressure, and he slowly sank to a knee and froze. She leaned forward and spoke quietly into his ear. Up ahead. See the big old pine at 2 o'clock. TJ tracked his eyes rather than his head, and after a brief moment made out what his sister had observed. His first thought was, Booger, Squatch. It was the largest human he'd ever seen. Easily over 7 feet tall, massively muscled, and wearing a suit? He didn't have time to consider the absurdity of the man's garments. The mass of human flesh had spotted them in turn. Perhaps he had noticed when TJ crouched or when Uncle Jim had slid behind a tree. For whatever reason, he roared and charged at them. Wahoo staggered forward, always forward. He had to get away. He fell for the upteenth time, and he was unable to rise to his feet this time, and so he crawled forward. He had no idea where he was, and he could barely see, but some part of him continued to push, to drive him onward, to seek home, such as it was. And then, up ahead he saw them, a pair of green, glowing eyes that had haunted him since early childhood. And they stared, they blinked, and then shifted to look just a bit to his left. And there, seated against the stump where he himself had rested earlier, was the gangster, Rodney. "Crap! I went in a circle," he wowed internally. "And now the eyes have found me!" He wondered why the two legs remained seated. Surely the thing had smelled him by now. He sensed a trap. His kind were particularly wary, despite their size and ferocity. And then he heard noises from the underbrush. The small, foul-smelling one approached, and they locked eyes amidst the gloom. He turned his attention back to the resting two legs. It was focused on the small one, and made uselessly loud noises. Surely the little one could hear it at that range. It was all very annoying, and his anger got the better of him. He stalked closer to the pair of odd creatures that had invaded his otherwise peaceful domain, and then he heard a noise, thwomp, and felt a piercing pain in his thigh, even as he screamed and leaped towards his prey. Before TJ could even rise completely to his feet, much less point a rifle, he felt a tremendous impact on his chest and shoulder that drove him backwards and to one side. His rifle dropped where he had now stood, and now several feet away from him and his writhing body, as he coughed and attempted to once again return oxygen to his lungs. He heard Cassie squawk as she too was knocked aside by the charging rhino of a man. He heard a shuffle and scuffle, and then a basso profundo voice cursed and said, "You fast, old man, but you ain't fast enough." He heard an all too familiar dull snap as a human bone was broken, and a grunt of pain and rage that rasped from his Uncle Jim. He looked around frantically as he gulped in huge breaths, yet he could not find his rifle. He scrambled towards the noises, and between the darkness and his now tearing eyes, he could make out only a massive shadow before him. He drew the large hunting knife that his father had gifted him and plunged it into the dark mass that turned and loomed above him. He felt his hair move and could have sworn he heard the air split as a massive fist swung just above his head. I had missed, but he did not. He felt the point of the blade enter the flesh and cut through until it stopped hard against the bone, where it paused and grated, and the edges did more damage as the target moved. TJ remembered to twist the knife and pull it back towards himself as quickly as he could. He did so, and the hot gush of blood drenched his hand, even as the iron smell reached his nostrils. He lunged forward once more, even as the Titanic man turned away defensively. He was not only large, but fast and skilled. TJ struck true once more, but this time the massive muscles and bones continued to turn and pulled the knife from his bloody slick hand. He expected a blow and raised his other hand defensively, but it never came. The beastman roared in agony and fury, and then crashed off into the trees. "Looks like we don't have to worry about what Rodney might say." Jay smiled down sarcastically at the exsanguinated corpse of the banger. Its throat was missing entirely. Nearby lay stretched the snoozing body of the big cryptid cat. On the other side was a quivering mass of bones and a little flesh that snuffled and coughed. "How you doing, Wahoo?" Silvio shook his head. "I don't think our little buddy will be in any condition to speak for a while. We need to get this pussycat on ice and call in transport." He grunted in satisfaction as he located a harness in his backpack. This was going to be a tough going. They'd have to borrow the four-wheeler that belonged to that Will kid, the one they'd left behind at the Bruxton place after his injury. They secured the peacefully sleeping monster cat, and despite being driven nearly completely from his mind, Wahoo was easy to coax into following them. Away from the big cat and the dark woods was the one thing he could comprehend. As they drew near the residence, they saw figures in the darkness ahead. A trio of shadows that moved slowly and cautiously. One had white hair. Ah, the Bruxtons, Jay thought. And then the coughing roar of a shotgun sounded ahead from the house. I was followed by a few more booms, and then silence. TJ and Cassie yelled in unison, "Mum!" And despite their own bruises and hurts, surged ahead through a final screen of trees. The tableau that greeted them was their mother, no longer standing on the porch, but over the still squirming bulk that had been BMF. She looked angry, frightened, and sick at all at once. And when she saw her children running towards her, she tossed the shotgun to one side and embraced them tightly in a fierce love. When they stepped away from one another, she turned, bent, and vomited. TJ looked back towards the trees and saw Uncle Jim emerge, Silvio and Jay flanking him and looking tired. The DMT Solutions Lab transport and clean-up teams arrived the next morning, and before the Broxtons finished breakfast, they'd left the property, and there would be no worries over gangsters or their vehicles, and no evidence of any great big cryptid cat. And since it was Saturday, and for once Terry Ann was off work, she agreed to take them to the hospital to visit Uncle Jim and his broken arm. And TJ was pretty sure that whether the hospital was ready or not, they would release old man. Probably be glad to be rid of him. He was a terrible patient. It would be a while before all the pain and fear were sorted though, and handled, but TJ knew that his family was strong and that together they would triumph. He noticed that Cassie sat in the back seat, no phone plugged into her ear, just arms crossed, clearly sulking again. What's the matter, sis? You still hurting from that wallop the booger man gave you? She huffed and glared at him. You got to stab him in the gut and arse. He was already dying. And Mum got to finish him with a shotgun. She doesn't even like shooting or hunting. She pursed her lips and then blurted, I never even got a round off. A few months later, in the nearest DMT Solutions Inc. facility. Will stared down at the cobalt blue knee that had grown over and replaced his original. He wiped it with a towel once more, even though it didn't sweat. The gym here was incredible, and after his latest workout, the DMTS doc had declared him fit and ready to return home. He'd have to wear a false brace to cover the shiny new flesh, but it worked great, better than the natural one. He knew that it was partially technology and partially flesh of some kind. He could feel it, but there were no effects from temperature. Weird. He looked up as a familiar figure walked carefully into the locker room. Hey Jay, fancy meeting you here. And then he noted that the young man, who wore shorts and a tee, sported a cobalt blue leg to match his arm. He looked up questioningly. He hadn't seen the DMTS field agent since he and his partner showed up to offer him a chance to get a knee, like Jay's arm, and at no cost to his family. Jay smiled abashedly. Just got the new limb working. Started therapy today. He shook his head at the unspoken question. No, I didn't always have it. Got a new injury on my first mission after field training. If I keep it up, the wags will start calling me Blue Jay. Some of them already have. He grinned, and Will produced his own lopsided grin in return. Wow, 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 meow, wow. Absolutely Brilliant stuff, wonderful writing there once again from the awesome Michael G. Lockhart. Thank you ever so much, brother, for the heads up on that one and the first dibs. Very, very much appreciated. And I'm sure our subscribers and listeners appreciate that too. As ever, guys and girls, you know the drill. Please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR. Of course, if you have a story to share with us on the show, please do get it over to my email, which is dmtforesterfear@gmail.com. And I look forward to hearing from you. As always, guys, I hope you're all holding up well in this stir-crazy times and trying to keep fit and healthy as possible. But above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.